I knew something was off the moment the police car pulled in. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because the call itself never should have happened. I was standing on my own land, near the fence line I'd checked 100 times before. No signs torn down. No gates moved. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. Quiet, rural, uneventful. Then the cruiser rolled up. Lights off. Engine idling. The kind of arrival that tells you this isn't urgent, just someone's version of a problem. Behind it, 2 HOA board members stood near the road like they'd summoned reinforcements.
Clipboards in hand.
Tight smiles. That practice confidence people get when they believe rules are on their side. One of them pointed at me before the officers even stepped out. "That's him," she said. "He's refusing to comply." Refusing to comply with what, exactly, was still unclear. The officers approached calmly. "Sir," one of them said, "we received a call about a homeowner violating HOA regulations and refusing to leave the property." I nodded once. "I don't live in the HOA," I said. Both officers paused, just for a beat. The HOA woman scoffed. "That's not true. His land is adjacent. He's subject to our rules." I didn't interrupt. That was mistake number one on her part, assuming proximity meant control. The officer looked between us. "Do you have documentation showing his property is part of the HOA?" She held up her clipboard confidently. "We have maps," she said. "Everyone around here knows." The officer didn't take the clipboard. "I mean official documentation," he clarified. Her confidence dimmed slightly. "The development's boundary includes." "Includes what?" he asked. She hesitated. I reached into my truck and pulled out a folded survey map, worn at the creases, stamped, recorded. I handed it over without drama. "This is my parcel," I said. "Purchased before the HOA was even formed." The officer studied it. His partners stepped closer. The HOA woman's smile tightened. "That doesn't matter. The HOA maintains standards for the whole area." "That's not how HOAs work," the officer replied calmly. Silence. The kind that makes assumptions uncomfortable. "I'm not violating anything," I continued evenly. "I'm repairing a fence on my own land." She crossed her arms. "You can't just ignore community rules." "I'm not part of your community," I said. That's when she changed tactics. "Well," she said sharply. He was aggressive. We felt unsafe. Both officers turned to her at the same time. "Did he threaten you?" one asked.
"No."
"Yell?"
"No."
"Approach you?"
"No."
Another pause. "So, what made you feel unsafe?" the officer asked. She gestured vaguely. "His attitude." The officer nodded slowly, not in agreement, but understanding. Understanding exactly what this was.
He handed the map back to me.
"We'll verify this," he said. "But if this parcel isn't in the HOA, they have no authority here." Her face hardened. "That's ridiculous." "It's jurisdiction," the officer replied. "Not opinion." The wind moved through the grass. Somewhere, a gate creaked softly. I watched the realization begin to form, not fully yet, but enough to unsettle her. Because if the land wasn't in the HOA, then the call she'd made didn't give her power. It took it away. And that plot twist was just getting started. The officers didn't rush. They never do when the facts matter more than the feelings. One of them stepped a few feet away, radio in hand, while the other stayed with us. Not as a guard, as a witness. Every word now had weight. The HOA board members exchanged looks. The confidence they'd arrived with began to thin, replaced by irritation. "We've had issues with him before," the woman said quickly. "He refuses to follow community standards." The officer didn't respond to that. He responded to the map. He unfolded it carefully, lining it up with the GPS grid on his tablet. Parcel numbers. Lot lines. Year of record. Each detail chipped away at the story they'd brought with them. "Your HOA was established in 2012, the officer said aloud, reading from the screen. "Yes," she replied. "And he bought after that."
"No," he said.
"He didn't." Her head snapped up. "This parcel was recorded in 2006, he continued, outside the subdivision boundaries." "That can't be right," she said. He's right next to us. Adjacent doesn't mean included, the officer replied evenly. The second officer returned, shaking his head slightly. County records confirm it, he said. His land was never annexed into the HOA. The words hit like a door closing. She laughed, sharp, disbelieving. So, you're saying he can just do whatever he wants? On his land, the officer replied.
Yes.
Within the law. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. The officer didn't argue fairness. That's jurisdiction, he said again. The male board member finally spoke up. But we maintain the road access, he said. That gives us authority. The officer turned to him. Maintenance doesn't grant control unless it's written into an easement. He checked the map again. It isn't. Silence spread outward, touching the fence line, the road, the open land beyond. The woman's voice dropped. So, what about the complaint? The officer looked at her directly. This is an unfounded call, he said. There's no violation. Her arms uncrossed, then crossed again. He refused to comply, she insisted. With what? The officer asked. She didn't answer. Because now, the answer would have been obvious.
Rules she didn't own.
Authority she didn't have. The officer turned to me. Sir, he said, you're not required to engage with the HOA on this property. I nodded. However, he added, turning back to them, continued attempts to enforce HOA rules outside your jurisdiction can be considered harassment. Her face drained of color. We were just trying to protect the community, she said weakly. You protect it by staying within your boundaries, the officer replied.
He closed the tablet.
That applies to everyone. The wind picked up again, carrying the sound of leaves and distant traffic. The officers began wrapping up their notes. The call was over, but the consequences were just beginning. Because once an HOA learns where its authority ends, it never forgets. And neither do the people it tried to control. The mood shifted once the officers closed their tablets. The conversation was effectively over, but the tension hadn't gone anywhere. It simply changed direction. The HOA board members stood there, unsure what to do next. Their original purpose, enforcement, had evaporated, and without it, they looked smaller, less certain. The woman tried one last angle. So, you're just going to let this continue? She asked, gesturing toward my fence and the work I'd been doing. The officer didn't raise his voice. Continue what? He asked.
This, she said.
Him ignoring the standards. He isn't subject to them, the officer replied. That's been established. She exhaled sharply through her nose. You're undermining the community, she said to me, bypassing the officers now. This is exactly how neighborhoods fall apart. I met her gaze calmly. I bought land, I said. Not permission. That landed harder than I expected. The male board member shifted his weight. Maybe we can come to some kind of agreement, he offered, suddenly conciliatory. Voluntary compliance. The officer glanced at him. Voluntary means optional, he said. And it can't be coerced. The woman bristled again. We weren't coercing. You called the police, the officer replied. That escalates things. She opened her mouth and closed it. Because this time, there was no counter. The officer continued. You reported a violation that doesn't exist. That's now documented. Her eyes widened. Documented how? As an unfounded complaint, he said. With names attached. That word changed everything. Documented. She glanced at her clipboard like it might protect her. This won't just disappear, will it? She asked quietly. No, the officer replied. It stays on record. The male board member swallowed. We didn't realize. Now you do, the officer said. The second officer turned to me. If they contact you again regarding HOA enforcement on this parcel, he said, call us directly. I nodded. That includes threats, fines, or notices, he added. The woman looked like she'd been slapped. You're telling him to report us? She snapped. I'm telling him to protect his rights, the officer replied evenly. She stepped back, looking around like the land itself had betrayed her. This is unbelievable, she muttered. Everyone else follows the rules. Everyone else agreed to them, I said. Silence followed. The officers finished their notes. This call is resolved, one said. You're free to go." They turned and walked back to the cruiser. The HOA members didn't follow. They stayed behind, staring at the fence line like it had shifted overnight. Finally, the woman spoke again. "This isn't over," she said, but without conviction. I didn't respond, because it was over. Not with shouting. Not with threats. But with facts. And facts don't argue. They simply stand there, unmoved, while everything else adjusts around them. The officers drove away, leaving behind a truth that couldn't be undone. My land wasn't in the HOA. It never had been. And now, neither was their authority. The officers didn't leave immediately. They never do when a situation like this shifts from confrontation to consequence. One of them stayed near the cruiser, finishing the report, while the other remained with us. Not to mediate, but to make sure nothing else was said that shouldn't be. The HOA woman noticed. "So that's it?" she asked, forcing a thin smile. "He just gets to ignore us now." The officer looked at her. "He's not ignoring you," he said. "You never had authority here." That distinction mattered more than she realized. She folded her clipboard shut, slower this time, like the weight of it had changed. "We were trying to keep standards," she said. "Property values." The officer nodded once. "Standards only apply where they're agreed to." Her jaw tightened. "So, what about the future?" she asked. "He's just untouchable?" "No one's untouchable," the officer replied. "But everyone has boundaries." He gestured subtly toward the fence line. "That fence marks yours." She followed his hand, eyes tracing the posts as if seeing them for the first time. "And if the HOA contacts him again about enforcement?" she asked. The officer didn't hesitate. "Then it becomes harassment." The word landed heavy. Harassment wasn't something she was used to hearing applied to her actions. She straightened. "We're not harassing anyone." "Intent doesn't override impact," the officer said. "You've been informed. That's what matters." The male board member finally spoke, voice low. "We'll update our records." "That would be wise," the officer replied. He finished the report, then turned to me. "Sir," he said, "you're free to continue your work." I thanked him. No handshake. No ceremony. Authority doesn't require acknowledgement to function. The officers drove off shortly after, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. The land went quiet again. The HOA members lingered, unsure what to do without the momentum of enforcement. Their presence felt awkward now, out of place. The woman cleared her throat. "We'll be in touch," she said. I met her eyes. "I'd prefer you weren't," I replied calmly. "Unless it's neighborly." She flinched just slightly. "That was unnecessary," she said. "No," I answered. "That was clarity." She looked away. They turned and walked back toward the road, slower than they'd arrived, clipboards held lower now, steps less certain. I watched until they disappeared from view. Then I went back to work. That part mattered. Continuing calmly after a confrontation sends a message stronger than any argument. Nothing changed for me. Over the next few days, the ripple spread. A letter went out from the HOA, carefully worded, vague, acknowledging a boundary clarification. No apology. No admission. Just adjustment. Surveyors came out. Stakes were checked. Maps were quietly revised. No one knocked on my door. No fines appeared. No warnings followed. The silence confirmed everything. They'd learned. Not because they wanted to, but because the system had corrected them. I finished repairing the fence that afternoon, stepped back and looked across the land. Same grass. Same wind. Same quiet. But now, the lines were understood. And when lines are understood, peace tends to follow. Things didn't change overnight. They rarely do when control fades instead of being ripped away. But they did change steadily in small, unmistakable ways. The first sign was the silence. No follow-up visits. No warning letters. No anonymous, concerned resident emails pretending to be polite while threatening consequences. The HOA's presence simply stopped at my fence line, exactly where it always should have. That silence wasn't accidental. It was learned. Word travels fast in communities built on rules. Faster still when those rules are revealed to have limits. I didn't need to explain anything to anyone. The correction had already been delivered by the only authority that mattered: the system. A week later, I noticed survey flags along the road near the development entrance. New markers, fresh paint, boundaries being redrawn not just on paper, but in people's minds.
No one asked me about it.
They didn't need to. A month passed. Then two. I saw the HOA woman once after that at a distance. She was walking with another board member, both of them stopping short of my fence line. They didn't wave. They didn't stare. They simply turned around. That told me everything. The land itself hadn't changed, but how it was treated had. And that's the real outcome in situations like this. Not victory, not humiliation, not revenge. Correction. I never wanted to embarrass anyone. I didn't even want conflict. All I wanted was what I'd paid for: autonomy, quiet, and the freedom to use my land without permission from people who didn't own it. And in the end, that's exactly what I got. HOAs thrive on assumption, on the idea that proximity equals authority and repetition turns opinion into rule. Most people comply not because they've checked, but because they've never had reason to, until someone does. That fence line became more than a boundary after that day. It became a reminder, not just to them, but to me as well. A reminder that calm is a strength, that facts don't need volume, and that calling an authority doesn't guarantee it will take your side, especially when you're wrong. I finished the last of the work that afternoon and stood back, looking across the land as the sun dropped low. Wind moved through the grass like it always had. Birds settled. Somewhere far off, a car passed. Normal. That's the best outcome there is. No lingering tension. No escalation. Just things returning to where they were always meant to be. My land. My rules. And everyone else finally understanding the difference between control and jurisdiction. The HOA never contacted me again, and I never had to remind them why.